Loss comes in many forms, and usually in unexpected ways. It can be devastating, leaving you facing an uphill struggle to go on with life without someone you thought would always be there. But life does go on, and even in the deepest despair, we can find hope. Welcome to Grief Relief with your hosts, Drs. Gloria and Heidi Horsley, brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation, helping people find hope after loss. And now here's Dr. Gloria and Dr. Heidi.
Welcome to our show. I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley with my co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we've got a great show today, and a really important one because there are a lot of people who've lost their spouse, and it's a tough thing. Sometimes we work with Michelle Neff Hernandez on her Soaring Spirits Foundations and do workshops, and people are really struggle when they lose that special person in their life.
Absolutely. You almost lose part of yourself. And we are going to talk about this today. And one of our guests today said, you know, even though you've lost that person, you kind of integrate them into your life and into your heart, and they do live on forever with you.
Absolutely. Well, that thought came from, you and I had talked on the phone about it, how important we thought that thought was. And that's from Reverend Rob Gieselmann, who's going to be on the show, and he talks about losing his wife and made that comment, and I want to explore that more with him. And then he knows a lot about the spiritual aspects of loss, and it'll be great to talk to him about it. And then Dr. Lynn Prashant, who is a good friend of ours for many years, right?
We love Lynn, and she talks a lot about how we hold grief in our body, and I love what she's doing. She does a lot of body work. So it's not just about talking about the loss, it's like, where do we hold these losses and what can we do to shift our energy?
Because, you know, losing a spouse is such a physical experience, too. I know you said there was some research about people miss most holding hands, right?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. That's the one thing that people say they miss most when a husband or a wife dies, is just holding their hand.
Yeah, and so that physical contact is so important, and maybe our guests will give people who are out there who've had a loss some insight on what they can do about it. Well, let's get started. Oh, by the way, I don't want to forget that we're going to close the show today with the Pally Rocks Band from Palo Alto High School, and with my grandson, Scotty Berra, is going to be introducing the song, so we're excited about that, too. And we thank all these kids for taking their Saturday, basically, to come and play on the show for us. So, and music is so important to lighten the heart and to honor people. And we thank them for doing that. So let's get started with Reverend Gieselmann.
Okay, very good. Hi, Reverend.
Can we call you Rob?
Hi. Absolutely. Please call me Rob.
All right, Rob, great. We want to thank you for being on our show today, and again, taking your time to come and talk about your losses and hope and healing and that kind of thing.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, we've really liked your book, haven't we, Heidi?
Oh my goodness, it's a great book.
And show it to us, yeah.
It's a really easy read, and bring tissue because it will tug at your heart.
Yeah, it does. You're an excellent writer.
Oh, thank you.
You really
are. And we love the piece about, well, why don't you talk about how it is? Well, first talk about your losing your wife and that experience and her name and the kids and all that.
Well, obviously losing a spouse is one of the most significant events in life. And most of us don't expect to do it as young as I was. I was 43 years old when Laura died, and it was sudden. It was unexpected. Even though she'd been sick, she had not been sick to the point of dying, and she died after gallbladder surgery. So waking up to find her and then to address the kids was, I mean, not only life-changing, it moved me into a completely different universe. All of a sudden, I was a single father, and even as a spiritual person in a church, you know, I was challenged with what does that really mean. So it really was a big change in my life. And
I imagine you probably worked with a lot of people that had been grieving and had loss, but until you've experienced it, it's a whole other thing once you experience it.
You know, it's really true. I had planned on writing a book about death anyway because I had had the privilege, and it's a privilege to be in a room when someone loses somebody. There's something, when it's a death that's anticipated, there's something intimate about that moment, and I wanted to write about that, but when Laura died, that became the obvious platform, frankly, and a sad platform.
We had someone tell us, one reverend that we had on our show, who made the comment that he really didn't quite get how painful it was until it happened to him.
That's exactly right. In fact, one of my favorite stories is every Sunday after church, I stand at the door and greet people as they're leaving and ask how they're doing. Well, after Laura died, for a long, long time, people wanted to know how I was doing, and they would say, "How are you doing?" And I would answer, "Fine," regardless of who was asking me. And those people who had not lost a spouse and wanted me to be okay said, "Good, I'm really happy that you're doing better." And those who had lost a spouse would look at me and say, "I know." And I knew they knew something that other people just didn't get about me now.
Yeah.
So what are some tips that you have for people? I mean, for one thing, I think there's some people who haven't been to church for a long time can they go back to their religion? I mean, do you have them, if they need that consolation?
I've seen many people after they lose a spouse return to religion, and it's not a groping for God, it is a looking for a deeper meaning and a way to place this hole in their heart in the universe. And so yes, absolutely, it's an opportune time because while some people do react and perhaps blame God for the death of the spouse, many people just have this hole, this place that something's missing, and they're looking for that. And faith provides solace. It really does.
Heidi and I talk about community, and I interviewed a man who was a reverend, and I said, when my son died, I really did not find the theology of my religion helpful. And I said, but I found the people fabulous. And he said to me, he laughed, and he said, that is your religion, that is God. God works through his people.
It is all of that. It is absolutely, and one person will find it through the faith, and another person will find it through the community. And the tenets of the faith aren't important at that point. They really aren't.
Yeah.
They're not going to provide that guidance, but the people are, and the care, and the love, and the support, and the prayers, and the place, and the.
I believe there's actually some research also that shows that people of faith do show a little less stress going through, and I have a feeling that's probably due to community.
Well, as you know, going through the grief process is hard no matter who you are, regardless of faith. But it does help to have both family and a community.
And you said making meaning somehow.
Making
of
meaning.
The loss, I think, is really important.
Absolutely, and for me, that meaning is not only in writing about it, but it also is through my kids, raising the kids and wanting to impart something to them that would be lasting, that they were not going to have otherwise because they lost their mom.
Is there anything unique about being a single guy as opposed to a woman? Are there any differences?
Gosh, the pain is, I don't think, any different. I mean, I think the pain of losing somebody is the same regardless. But our roles aren't as naturally towards the maternal. We don't naturally turn towards the maternal. So from a parenting standpoint, perhaps, as far as from a spousal standpoint, I think there clearly is. I know from my own observation, men are far more likely to get married within a year than women are, and it's often because they're trying to replace what they had. It's not a bad thing necessarily, it's just there's this back to this whole.
And what was the hardest thing about raising children as a single parent?
Oh,
I know it's probably, I don't know if that's hard to say, because there's probably a lot of things, right?
For me, the most emotionally wrenching part was when they wanted a mom, and there I am, and
they're crying for their mom.
And they're crying for their mom.
Yeah.
And we had.
And you can't fix it.
You can't fix that at all.
And you want to fix it for your kids and make it better and help them.
Exactly.
And also, I imagine while you're grieving, it's hard, I think, for parents, because here you are grieving, but yet you're also needing to help your children through their grief process.
And I will say, maybe that's a plus of having walked with so many people through grief, but I knew enough of what was going on with me that at times I could put it aside and say, talk to me and ask them about it. And what I would say to any parent who loses a spouse and is raising children is keep the conversation open with the kids.
That can be really hard with teenagers too. Wow.
Well, and
having
my
the
kids were, I
conversation.
will say my kids were younger,
younger,
you know,
so
they
you
were
could-
8 and 5,
Yeah.
so that was a little easier for me, but you're
Well,
right.
listen, thank you so much for sharing that with us today, and we want you to stay while we introduce Lynn Prashant because we want to take some questions from the audience.
I'd like that.
So Heidi, we're going to have Lynn Prashant on in a minute and talking about her debriefing, and
Love it.
we're going to see the roll-in from that she's given us a roll-in, talking a little bit about her debriefing process, and then we'll get some tips for our audience out there if they've had a loss, how they can use her debriefing.
Great. Okay.
All right.
Hello, I'm Dr. Lynn Prashant. I'm a somatic thanatologist. I work with grief and loss of any kind. What I've learned over my years of working in this field is that talk therapy for many, many decades was the standard opportunity for grieving individuals to deal with their grief. What I realized after the loss of my husband in 1984 was that I particularly needed physical, somatic ways to release the pain of the grief that I was experiencing. Talking alone does not enable the body to release the accumulation of grief that occurs within our cells, tissues, and organs over our lifetime. Teaching individuals, according to who they are, specific tools to transform the grief, their own somatic grief, is the major focus of my work. Meeting each individual exactly where they're at, making sure they have an opportunity to be heard, and giving appropriate feedback and tools, life skills, if you will, because there is no end to grief. It's part of the human condition. And working with it skillfully, asking questions, and meeting that individual in their heart of hearts is what my work is about. I look forward to telling you more. Thank you so much.
Video of Lynn and hear her talk about her program and what she's doing. So let's go
Yes.
greet her
Okay.
in person.
Hey,
Live and loud.
Lynn.
Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so
Great.
much.
My name's Jen. Well, Lynn, you lost your husband. Man, your husband's a good-looking man.
Good looking man.
Yeah, we have a little picture of him. I don't know if they're going to show it up on the screen or not. I guess they haven't found it yet. But anyway, he is. And you were pretty young, too, as Rob was.
I was 35, he was 36.
Wow.
And although we knew he'd had cancer before, the re-diagnosis was quite shocking because we flirted with the possibility of it not reoccurring. And so it was cancer that returned. And it really confronted us with how we were living our lives and what our hopes and dreams were, what we could accomplish together, and what we had to recognize that we would never.
Wow, that's tough.
It was very challenging.
Yeah. And unlike Rob, his wife died, suddenly, even though she'd been ill. But your husband, you had this process, and you actually ended up working with some of the rock stars of grief and loss, as it were, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and also Stephen Levine, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me in the midst of all of it, the gift of having those professionals with us and the irony of, again, touching on the making meaning. What Mark said to me before he died is that if you can find some way to share or communicate what we've been through, it will give it more meaning or validity. In his mind, it was for the higher purpose, that if I could bring it forth and share.
Yeah. Now talk to us, because I think this is so important, because Heidi and I are in the talking business,
Right.
in the therapy business, and here you are, you've kind of moved one step beyond it and talk about how grief is actually stored in our cells, which, by the way, I think is very 2000, because it's the idea that we're all learning all sorts of things about the brain and how our chemistry is carrying memories, and that we can actually change chemistry with things like hugs and gratitude, and there are actually ways to change your brain chemistry for people out there. So what's your thought out there? I've had a loss. I've lost a spouse. I'm through that early initial, maybe 6 months or a year. and I'm still feeling really sad and lonely, and help me.
Well, what I realized about my own process was I had been a physical education teacher and been a very physical person. And I could talk about my losses continually. It was my loss of my husband. I realized that the ache in my heart remained. I would talk about it intellectually. I'd have new approaches or ideas, yet the actual sense of a heavy-heartedness didn't shift until I sought out massage therapy and realized during that process that something was being addressed within my whole system that talking didn't accomplish. And it had occurred to me that if it was so important for me, there had to be a population of people that would benefit similarly. So at that point, I started asking myself some operative and instrumental questions. What do I need in order to change how I'm feeling? Who is it that I can work with? And what I actually found was there were not a lot of people that related to my request. And it was about my heart aching. And I wanted to experience compassionate touch. And it turns out that the woman who actually massaged me didn't tell me anything about her story until I asked. And when I asked, she said, I was waiting for you to ask. She said, years ago, I lost my husband and my son in an accident, and it took physical touch before I felt safe again in my body.
Wow. Well, okay, so here I am. I'm not going to have massage therapy. I mean, because I don't do that.
Okay.
But I'm thinking, what can I do sitting here? I mean, one of the things Heidi and I talked about is asking people for hugs.
Hugs are fabulous. Hugs really, in the truest sense, the arms are an extension of the heart. When we wrap our arms around somebody, or somebody does that
And you can
for
also
us,
wrap them around yourself.
I was going to
too.
say,
Surprisingly.
it's interesting
and
that you would do that. I love that.
a self-hug. And I often say when I do phone counseling, please give yourself a hug for me.
Ah, nice.
And I'll do the same.
Yeah.
The way we approach the body is specific to each individual's inclinations. So the point that's important to state is that it's the intention of what we are looking for and asking ourselves what form might work. It could be dance, it could be journaling, it could be yoga, it could be walking in the breast cancer marathons that are done. It could be any application of our physical intention to express. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work stressed externalizing what we were feeling rather than internalizing, expressing rather than repressing.
Great. Well, Lynn, thank you. You've given us some great ideas, and people can find you online at Degriefing.
Either degriefing.com or Integrative Grief Therapy, and they can find the manual that I wrote about.
She's got
this
a great
work.
manual, and it's got all sorts of things that you can do in that manual. So thank you so much. And let's take
Thanks,
a few
Lynn.
let's take
Thank
a few
you, Heidi.
questions
Thank
from
you.
the
Okay.
audience
I
for
just
both
wanna,
of you.
I just want to say I love what Lynn does, and I've watched her do it, and I've watched somebody really heal after doing it. Alan Peterson. So, okay. Questions? Can you stand, please? Sure. Thank you.
Reverend, did you ever lose faith after losing your wife?
I didn't lose faith. My orientation to God is somewhat of a positive one. I find God to be good, and so I never blamed God. But there's a great story in the Hebrew Scriptures about Jacob wrestling with God, and I found for years after that there were times when I was wrestling with God over that and all that was going on. So I didn't lose my faith, but I certainly wrestled.
And I always tell people it's okay to be angry at God. He has strong shoulders. He can handle it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Reverend, what do you think the hardest thing for your kids was when you lost your wife?
Well, they might not admit it, but it's probably being stuck with me. But probably really was the hardest thing is what I said earlier, which is just the times when they so wanted a mommy and they didn't understand why she wasn't there anymore, and I didn't understand.
That's tough.
Yeah.
And that was Teddy Johnson, by the way. Thank you, Teddy. Okay.
Lynn, what was the worst thing about losing your husband?
I was 35, and I struggled to find other widows, if you will, that I could relate to, because the two women in my family that were widows were my father's mother, my grandmother, and my father's sister, my aunt. Yet they'd already had many more years with their spouse. I had 3 years with Mark. So it was about putting it into perspective and recognizing that not on a level that I was familiar with, but at another level, he'd be in my heart forever. The lack of his physical presence was challenging because it was always a soothing part of my reality. To be near him, to hold his hand, to tell each other jokes that only the two of us found funny. It was losing the reflection that I really trusted, and losing that part of myself. When he loved me, I'd love how it felt. And so losing that part of me that he wasn't there to remind me about. That was hard.
Heidi, I think that's great. Thank you all for giving us the questions from our audience. We have a great studio audience. One of the things that I'd like to put in a little plug for right now, given what Lynn was saying, is Michelle Neff Hernandez's Soaring Spirits Foundation, because you can find that on the internet, and she's doing great things for widowers through the internet and her conferences, isn't she, Heidi?
Absolutely. And you know, the one thing about her conference is it's widows of all ages, because sometimes young widows have a really hard time finding anyone they can identify with.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, listen, thank you both for being on the show today. It's just been wonderful having you on, and I
Thank
know
you.
there's so many people out there that you're helping.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
Yeah,
for
thank you
asking
both.
us. Thank
Right.
you.
And now we bring you Chris Donahoe from the Grief Relief Archive.
I can race through the day, can live in the rush. And what can you do? What can you do? I can lie in the dark, say life isn't fair. And what can you do? What can you do? But teach me everything. And the only thing in every brilliant day, the only thing when all is stripped away, gratitude. I can give you my money, can lend you a hand. And what do you do? What do you do? I can give you a kiss, can give you a song. And what do you do? What do you do? But give me miracles. And yeah, the only thing in every brilliant day, the only thing when all is stripped away, gratitude. Gratitude. A promise due right, a whisper goodbye. Carry me with you. The only thing in every brilliant day. The only truth when all is stripped away. away. Gratitude.
Thank you.
This has been Grief Relief, hosted by the mother-daughter team of Dr. Gloria and Dr. Heidi Horsley. This show's been brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation, helping people find hope after loss. Be sure to visit Dr. Gloria and Dr. Heidi at opentohope.com, where you can listen to radio programs, watch past episodes of Grief Relief, read articles, and view books. You can also join them on Twitter and Facebook and put your events on their international calendar. Thanks for watching, and remember, others have been there and made it, and you can too.